At 2:53 a.m. on September 22nd, 1993, 47 people would die in one of America's worst railway accidents. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of the Big Bayou Canot railway disaster. Viewer discretion is advised. I think this might actually be the first time I've ever covered a worst freak accidents style story in long form here on YouTube. Yeah. The Sunset Limited was an Amtrak passenger train. In this particular case, I guess it was the number 2, which was an overnight express train. And in this story, it's traveling eastbound. So it goes primarily across the entire country. This particular train started in Los Angeles and it was heading into Miami, Florida. Unfortunately, this particular train would not make it there. This Sunset Limited passenger train was carrying 220 people. That number included 2 conductors and 3 engineers. The trip up until this point was a pretty relaxed trip. People were enjoying themselves on the train. There's like a dining car. There's, places to sleep. I've never actually been on a train before now that I'm thinking about it. I've never been on a non-Disneyland style train before. And I don't know if I want to at this point. So as the Sunset Limited is approaching Mobile, Alabama, there is another vessel in the area. This was a towboat called the Movilla. The Movilla was owned and operated by Warrior and Gulf Navigation. The pilot of the Movilla was a man named Willie Odom. For some reason, he was not completely trained on how to use the ship's radar. And for reasons unknown, the Movilla did not have a compass on board, and it did not have any maps on board. This particular evening was also a very foggy evening. The fog was very dense. It was really hard to see through it. On the Movilla were 2 deckhands and also the captain. And like I said, Willie Odom was relatively inexperienced, I should say. He had not been doing this a very long time. Now, to backtrack just a little bit, the Sunset Limited had made a stop in New Orleans. And when it was in New Orleans, it had to stop for longer than anticipated because it needed some repairs to the air conditioning unit. And apparently like a couple of toilets were malfunctioning. So this actually would cause a delay. And this particular delay would prove to be extremely fatal. It was roughly a 30-minute delay. But then it continues on its path, and like I said, now it gets to Mobile, Alabama. It stops at the station for just a few minutes, and this is at about 2:33 a.m. As it's in the station at Mobile, the Movilla is working its way up the river, the Mobile River. The Movilla is pushing 6 barges, and it's trying to navigate these barges through this dense fog. Now, it's supposed to continue down the Mobile River because it branches off. So it goes this way towards the, continuing on the Mobile, but then if you go to the left, it turns into the Canot River. The Canot River had recently been, basically, there was a ban on, large ships from traveling that direction because it was more narrow, and there was the Canot Bridge that was on this river. And the bridge was not tall enough for a ship or any of these barges to go underneath. Because of the very dense fog, and because there was not a compass on board and there were no maps on board, Willie Odom, who was piloting the Movilla, thought he was veering towards and continuing on the Mobile. But in actuality, he accidentally, because he couldn't see anything, he veered left. It ended up going down the Canot River. And the move is so subtle that no one even noticed. But as the towboat and the barges are now going down the Canot, the fog is becoming way more dense. And so Willie Odom says, we need to basically stop and tie the boat off and wait for the fog to clear. Now, like I said, the towboat was equipped with a radar system, and he can even, in the radar, he could see that it was a very narrow section, which kind of confused him a little bit. But then on the radar, as they're thinking about, tying the boat off and waiting throughout the fog, they see a blip on the radar that he actually thought was another barge. So he approaches this barge, or what he thought was a barge, and all of a sudden they strike something, and it's not a barge. What they actually strike, without having any visual on it, is actually the Canot Bridge. The Big Bayou Canot Bridge was used by freight trains, it was used by passenger trains, and it is a single track that runs across the entire bridge. The bridge consisted of 3 separate sections. And the bridge was also fitted with sensors for the trains, so that the sensors would determine if there was any kind of damage to the track, significant damage, if there was a misalignment, if anything had been sabotaged, the sensors would turn from green to red, and then it would basically let trains stop before proceeding. So the bridge was a trestle bridge in the southwest section. There was then a long wooden bridge on the northeast part of it. And then the center of the bridge was basically fitted to one single column. When they built the bridge, this center piece was actually meant to swivel in order to let smaller boat crafts through. But they had never actually utilized the swinging feature. That being said, when they realized that they weren't going to actually be using the swinging feature, they still never permanently connected the bridge end to the centerpiece. But the track itself, the train track, was one continuous piece, so it was not sectioned off. So now the Movilla, thinking it had seen another barge and was, I guess, trying to connect with it, from what I understand. I may be incorrect on that portion of it, but they thought it was another vessel. But what it actually was the Big Bayou Canot Bridge. When they struck the bridge, it actually caused the track on the bridge to sway. So what it did was it misaligned the track by approximately 3 feet. And this happened at about 2:45 a.m. And this is because the center portion of the bridge itself was not permanently connected to the other end of the bridge, which is what caused everything to move. But the crazy part is even though the tracks swayed and literally curved and moved over, the track itself didn't break, didn't snap. And so the sensors did not pick up on that, meaning it had no idea that there was this damage now to the track. And so the green light stayed on. Now the Movilla is kind of just sort of drifting, and it's kind of, now it's drifting to the banks of the river, completely unaware of what it just did and what just happened. Then, at 2:53 a.m., the Sunset Limited, with 220 people on board, crosses over the Big Bayou Canot Bridge, the bridge that is now damaged, the bridge where the train tracks did not trip the sensor that there was damage, and so it just kept going. The train was traveling at approximately 72 miles per hour, or 116 kilometers per hour. The lead car struck the displaced portion of the tracks, which caused the Sunset Limited to derail, and the force was so strong that the bridge then collapsed. It's reported that the lead engineer was killed on impact. Again, the fog was really dense, the light sensor was green, and there was no indications that they needed to stop. Then the second car of the train slammed into the first, which was then teetering off the edge of the bridge, which this particular portion then basically caught on fire. The third train, basically its wheels and brakes and all that was cut off from all of the force, and then it too began to collapse into the water below. There was diesel fuel in this portion, and because the fire from the second car, when it all came into contact, it just basically spread. The fire just completely spread. Now we have several cars that had collapsed into the water. Then the baggage car, the sleeper car, it too kind of folded into this collision and also caught on fire. The following car and then the car after that fell into the river next, and they basically just filled with water. The remaining portion of the train remained on the tracks for the most part, and the one that was in front of all of this was basically now teetering on the edge of this now destroyed bridge. It was kind of just like hanging off, and that's finally when, you know, the momentum kind of stopped and the damage now had been done. 3 minutes later, after the incident at 2:56 a.m., the conductor calls for a mayday. Because of some like communication issues, I guess the mayday people thought it was coming from the Mobile River portion, and so they went to the wrong area initially. So they didn't get to the actual crash site until 3:20 a.m. Unfortunately, you can only get to this portion of where the accident happened by boat or by train, because it's a very densely wooded area. This is like the middle of nowhere. It's pitch dark. You can't see a damn thing, and not to mention all of the fog. So getting to the crash site was also very complicated. When, the Coast Guard arrives and all the rescuers arrive, I mean, it's just absolute, as you can imagine, utter chaos. People are screaming for their lives. People are in the water, grasping for help. People are climbing out of the cars of the train. People are trying to break out of the train. Some of the portions that are on fire, people are trying to get out of. And then because the Movilla is also in the area still, they're beginning to rescue people and pull people on board, I guess not realizing that they're the ones who actually caused this entire thing to happen. And because of the chaos and because of not knowing exactly what caused this, the Coast Guard and, all of the rescuers they have to assume this is a terrorist attack. Terrorists have blown up this train. That's their initial thought. But they have no idea, and they're just trying to get people out of this train. They're trying to pull people out of the water. The Coast Guard is able to reach like small vessels, like civilian vessels, any and all boats in the area. Please come to this area immediately. And so you get people, civilian boats, and other boats coming to the area and pulling people out of the water as best as they can. It wouldn't be until approximately 8:30 in the morning when they finally pulled the last survivor out of the wreckage. By this time, they had basically realized that it was the Movilla that had struck the bridge. And so they're almost kind of not, they didn't put Willie Odom under arrest, but they're basically detaining him to see, because they want to know what the hell happened, because he was, they found out, the one piloting the Movilla. And, it's still just pure and utter chaos and confusion and craziness. They weren't sure if maybe he was drunk. They weren't sure if he did this deliberately. Maybe this was a terrorist attack. Maybe it was domestic terrorism. Did he get distracted by something? And then we'll get back to that in a minute. But unfortunately, there would be 101 people who were severely injured and taken to the nearest hospitals. And sadly, 47 people lost their lives in the accident. Most of those people, other than like a couple of them, which they can confirm were killed by the actual impact, most of the victims who died were actually killed because of smoke inhalation. They had either or burned in the fires, or they had drowned because they were trapped in submerged train cars that they just could not get out of. 47 people. It is one of the deadliest train accidents in American history. So, of course, they're taking a very heavy look now at Mr. Willie Odom, because he was, again, piloting the Movilla. They want to know what happened. Well, the investigation would basically turn up that Willie Odom wasn't really responsible, not criminally responsible, for what happened. One, you had the extremely dense fog, which everybody can confirm. It was nearly impossible to see. Willie Odom was very new, I guess, in his career, and he did not have a lot of experience. He was not trained properly. He was not trained on how to properly use the radar system that was on the Movilla, and that's not his fault. There was also, like I said, no compass on board, and there were no maps on board. Again, that was not his fault. And they would conclude that Willie Odom did not intentionally do this, and that every action he took was just due to inexperience, and it was literally just a horrific accident. Ultimately, the actual cause of this was the construction of the Big Bayou Canot Bridge itself. Because there was one long consecutive stretch of uninterrupted train track on top of a bridge that was initially designed to swivel in the middle, but then decided was not going to be used for that purpose because they did not permanently connect the centerpiece to the opposite side of the bridge. That therefore, if something did strike the bridge, it would cause the bridge portion to twist, and then the track would just move along with it. They also determined they never installed any lighting on the bridge. Like power lighting, so that if a ship like the Movilla had gone into the area, they would have seen those lights. They would have been warning lights saying, basically you're going the wrong way. There's a bridge here. There was never any of those on the bridge. So it was pitch darkness amidst all of the fog. So ultimately, the cause of this horrific incident was many things. Was a poorly constructed bridge that was refitted with a consecutive track. Even though it was moved 3 feet by the crash of the Movilla, the railway itself didn't break, which didn't cause any of the sensors to go off, which meant the train had no idea. Then you have the inexperienced pilot of the Movilla not being trained on how to use the radar. There's a lot of things that just went into this, and a lot of it was all unfortunate, and a lot of it was just, it was all just a horrific accident. But what makes matters even worse, towards the beginning, I told you that the train had been delayed in New Orleans by about 30 minutes. Had the train not been delayed by those repairs for 30 minutes, the Sunset Limited would have crossed the Big Bayou Canot Bridge approximately 20 minutes sooner, which means that the train itself would have crossed the bridge shortly before the Movilla had crashed into it, which means the incident never would have happened. And because no other train was scheduled to go over the bridge for at least a decent amount of time, it would have been noticed by the following morning, once the fog had lifted, that the bridge had been damaged and that the tracks had been moved over 3 feet, which means they would have been able to prevent any other trains from coming over the bridge, and nobody would have lost their lives. But of course, they didn't know this was going to happen, so, the delays aren't the blame for it. It's just one of those things you look at and go, damn, had there not been that delay, 47 people would still be alive. Because of this incident, of course, because it always takes something horrific happening for us to actually fix things, a lot of new regulations were put into place. All of these bridges now require lighting to warn any ships that may be accidentally in the wrong area can see that there's a bridge there. All these types of tugboats are now fitted with proper radar, which every captain and pilot is now properly trained on how to use. Every tugboat or every vessel of this nature is now required to have maps, required to have a compass, and the training is a lot more diligent in terms of, training their pilots and captains and whatnot. And obviously this would correct any and all bridges who have this similar construction. And so more regulations were put into place to make sure this type of thing would not happen again. The site of the accident would be, memorialized. There's a nice plaque there for it. And a lot of the survivors had gone back over the years during like ceremonies and whatnot to remember the victims. And the cool thing is a lot of the survivors, they have openly said they do not blame Willie Odom for what happened. They don't hold any grudges against him. And these are victims who actually lost family in this accident. A lot of these victims are actually concerned about Willie Odom's well-being because you have to imagine that this took a severe mental toll on him. I mean, he probably does feel extreme guilt over all of this. Most of the victims understand that it really wasn't necessarily the tugboat at all. It was really the construction of the bridge. It was, they put a lot of blame on Amtrak and whoever put this bridge together. Train derailments are terrifying because when they happen, they are absolutely horrific. And I cannot imagine the level of horror that these people had to go through. And I know it's rare, but it does not inspire me to ever want to get onto a train. But hopefully all involved in some way, shape, or form have finally found some level of peace. But that is it for this story, True Crime Maroonies. I hope you found it interesting. It's pretty wild and sad. But, as usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this video, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories normally, or stories like this. So please feel free to subscribe to me, give this video a like. I also tell true crime stories and death stories over on TikTok, which is linked in the link tree in the description below. Please feel free to follow me there if you like. Next, if there's a case you want me to cover, please email me. The email's listed below. Just email me the name of the person involved in the case, and then when it happened and where it happened, and I'll add it to my list eventually. And then I will cover it eventually. I just can't tell you when because I pick the cases I cover at random. And then if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. We do ship internationally. Also in the link tree below. And then I have a Discord server. If you want to join it, please feel free to do so in the link tree below. Blah, 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 blah. But be over the age of 18 or else you'll be kicked out of that joint. Sorry. Hashtag not sorry. But that is it for this video. True Crime Maroonies. Miss Molly wants to say goodbye. Want to show them your pretty little flower? You got a new flower thing? Can you see it? Can you see it? No? Okay. Well, anyway, Molly says bye. She got a haircut recently by me. I'm not very good, so please don't judge me. Judge her. She's the one who has to wear it, not me. Okay. She hates me. I woke up last night with a knife to my throat. It was in her paw. So she does not take kindly to the bad haircutting I gave her. She's a thug, so I'll probably have to cover my own story on here because Molly had ended my life, which is, I'll cover it as a ghost, I guess. Why are you going to do that to me, bro? Okay, well, pause up, homies. Bye.